besides, it was a camp, meeting a lot of nice people, making friendship. It has really amazed me, some of the talent of some of these people, like Bobby Joe, and he could make and build anything, and Randall Hancock, he knows everything about pistols, and Sammy Mortis and his son are beekeepers and sell honey. And this fellow over here with the decathlon, amazing what he can do with cedar branches. It just Dennis Courtney back there, he shot, what, 6, 7 people who's got notches on his pistol. And it just amazes me, some of the talents, Lamar, with making the sticks. And it just amazes me, the talent of some of these, of the members here, besides the friendship, it's just really amazing. And Larry McDaniels has been on the moonshine over there. And all. But anyway, on this line, we have a member that has amazed me and has amazed everybody here with some of his talents. Our speaker tonight that was in the paper had to cancel on us because of a doctor's appointment. So kind of a last minute deal, we called and he graciously accepted. And another camp member has a great talent too, is Grant Graves. And we're going to ask Grant to come on back up. He got started last month, but he really didn't get finished telling us everything he needs to tell us. So tonight's going to be his night. It was in the paper, the Honorable Mayor Yellow. Sit here, hold up here, or what have you. Use his mic now, everybody wants to hear you.
Not used to these mics, but I guess that'll be all right. I'll get used to it. Not used to these notes either. I used to remember a lot better than I can, but I can tell you, when you have a stroke, one of these strokes, it affects the memory organ a little bit, so you have to go to using these notes a little bit sometimes. But I appreciate this again. It was a sort of short notice to me, but I'll get up here and do the best I can. Maybe it'll be a little something be of interest to somebody. And I always enjoy sharing my stuff. I've always been interested in history, especially this area. And well, this area means a great deal to me. My family on both sides lived in it for 7 generations. And I've just always been interested in history all of my life, especially this area and around Tipper County, old Tipper County, and this over here, all the part of the Benton that we live in was Tipper when we moved there. And so it's just something that's been a lifelong interest to me. I'm going to start out just a little bit by telling, I talked about my mother's side and the people that was in it in the war. I'm going to give just a little bit of history first. On my dad's side, the ones that was in the war, then I'm going to concentrate mainly on my street ancestors, the Street family, and Uncle Solomon Street and some of the things he did during the war, because that's been a point of interest, and different ones have asked me to talk about him and some things I know about him. But my great-great-great-granddaddy Graves came in here from Franklin, Tennessee. He was born in 1783 and a veteran of the war, 1812. And he settled out there around where the Gravestown community is right now in about 1843. He brought his family in there. And when the war opened up, he had 3 sons that joined the 34th Mississippi. And my great-great-grandfather, James Edgar Graves, Private Company B, 34th Mississippi Infantry, was who I came into this camp under. And he's buried in the Chevy Creek Cemetery, our family cemetery out there, right up the road, Crawford County Road there, from Gravestown. Way up there in the woods. Some of you have been to it with me. Then on Second Lieutenant John Addison Ford, that's my great-great-granddaddy also. Company A, 2nd Mississippi Cavalry. He's also buried in the Chevy Creek Cemetery. And I've got his cavalry saddle that he used during the war, and I've given it to my nephew, Jonathan Shute, because he's interested in all the Civil War stuff, and I knew he'd take care of it, so it's in his care now. Great-grandpa John Allen Calhoun Hobson, 7th Mississippi Cavalry. Now, I'm sure he wasn't the last surviving Confederate veteran in Tippah County, but he was one of the last when he died in the mid-1930s. And my dad was a pretty good-sized boy when he died, and he has quite a few memories of him because he used to come down and stay 2 weeks at a time. And Daddy was a little boy, and back in those days, those old dog trot houses, they had beds on both sides. And Daddy said they'd tell him to sleep with Paul Hobson. And he said, one story he told me, he said one night it thundered real loud, lightning hit something close to the house. He said Paul Hobson sat up in the bed in his sleep, hollered, "Charge!" loud. I said, "What'd you do?" He said, "I was about 4 or 5 years old." He said, "I charged across that hall." And then he said he had one Christmas, he got a little cap pistol for Christmas. Now this was during the Depression days. He said it was one of the few only bought toys that he ever got in his life. You know, he said most of their toys was handmade. And he said he showed it to Paul Hobson sitting out on the porch. He said he seen him pick up an old piece of cedar and take his knife out and start carving around. He said later on that evening, he said, "Come here, Lynn, I got you something." He said he handed him the prettiest Bowie knife, a toy about that long, carved out of that cedar. So he said, "Now you got your pistol and you got your knife, go kill you some Yankees." But anyway, he had some good memories of him, talking about the war, you know, and stuff before he passed away. And Paul Hobson was buried in the Shady Grove Cemetery here in Tippah County. And another sort of ironic thing about Paul Hobson, I believe his wife would be probably, I don't know, it's not verified, but I believe she was probably Tippah County's last living Confederate widow when she died in May of 1969 at the age of 95. It may have been one lived longer than that, but I sort of doubt it. And by his first marriage, he raised 7 children, and then when he married her, he was in his 60s and had 6 more after that. So she was 95 when she died in 1969. And I'm going to get to my street ancestors now. Grandfather Anderson Street and his wife, Kezzy McBride Street. Grandfather Anderson Street was born in 1805, and they came in here about 1834, out around where Antioch Church is now in that area, and settled there. I believe they came from around Hardeman County, Tennessee, down here, and built out there and started raising their family. Some of their kids was done born at that time, and another thing I know about that, his granddaddy, Samuel Street, fought in the Revolution, and this is in the Tippah County book and verified by the Daughters of the American Revolution. It's in there 2 or 3 places. Samuel Street was awarded the sword of Lord Cornwallis at the surrender of Yorktown for America's service in the Revolutionary War. And the Daughters of the Revolution will back that up. That's not no hand-down story, that's fact right there. I'd love to know what happened to that sword, but somebody's got it somewhere, I guess. But anyway, Grandpa Anderson and his wife had 15 children, and they had 7 sons. All 7 sons, when the war broke out, enlisted in the Confederate Army. 3 were killed, and the other 4 were wounded. And Grandpa James Joseph, the oldest, was a member of Company G, 34th Mississippi Infantry, and he was wounded in the right leg October 8, 1864 in the Battle of Perryville, Kentucky. William Street, born 1837, was killed, and we don't know exactly where he was killed, but he was a member of the Company A, 2nd Mississippi Cavalry and Streets Battalion. So it was with Solomon Street's group, his brother, wherever he was killed. Daniel Street, a third brother, killed at Meriwether Ferry, November 19, 1863. That was in Tennessee. That was on a raid with his brother Solomon's group too. John Wallace Street, fourth brother, captured Lookout Mountain at Missionary Ridge. And I talked with his granddaughter in 1980, Lottie Street, who's about 90 years old. She told me a story about that. She said he got shot in the stomach up there at Missionary Ridge with she said, a spent ball. In other words, it had just about played out when it hit him in the stomach. And it just hit him hard enough to knock him unconscious. It didn't go in him enough to kill him, you know. Well, when he woke up, the rest of the Confederates was gone, and there was Yankees standing all around him. He said he stood up and said, "Where are they?" And they said, "Oh, lay your gun down, Johnny, we got you." What he said they said. So he spent the rest of the war in Rock Island Prison and lived and returned back home to Tippah County after the war. The next brother was Calvin Street, captured and spent the rest of his time in prison on Long Island, New York, up there in a prison up there, and survived and came back home and told of making rings and jewelry or something out of gutta percha and stuff and selling to the Yankee women, as he said, would come to see the Confederate monkeys and stuff that, you know, to make fun of them and stuff, and they would sell these little trinkets and stuff to them to get a little bit of money to, I guess, get a little something to survive on or whatever out of those camps, out of those places. And then the sixth brother, Elliott Street, Company A, 2nd Mississippi Cavalry, 3rd Lieutenant, and Streets Battalion, was also in Uncle Solomon's outfit. Lived till 1909 and moved to Texas after the war. And of course, the one that there's the most interest in and the most documentation on is Uncle Solomon himself. Born in 1832 and joined up here at Ripley when the war broke out. Company F, 2nd Mississippi Infantry. And these troops marched from Ripley out here up to Salisbury, Tennessee, where they got on a train and rode the car in. Within a matter of a day or a few days, sent them to Lynchburg, Virginia, where they put them in the army in Northern Virginia up there. And they fought in the 7 Days Battle, 7 Pines, Spurs Manassas, and up there about a year. And he made a pretty good start for himself as a drill sergeant. They said he was a giant of a man with a big booming voice that could be heard all over the camp. So he was good for a drill sergeant. They said a man in that 1894 article, the survivor of that, said when he drilled his men, he'd say, "Hold them heads up. Look at me. Look like me. Look like the devil. Look like me." Or something that way, you know. He said he'd get their attention. So I don't know. He must have got their attention good because they wanted him for a drill sergeant. They said you could hear him from one end of that camp to the other. But anyway, when things were found out after about a year up there, by 1863, the last of 62 and 63, things in Tippah County had got to be in a terrible situation, those that knows anything much about it. We'd done been pillaged and stripped out here, and the folks down here were suffering in a terrible shape. So he hired a conscript, which he got permission to do. And quite a few people did that. And he came back down here. When he got here, he found conditions much worse than what he ever even feared they'd be. And he immediately went to work. Colonel Faulkner first organized a company of home guard, but the Confederate conscript agents soon broke that organization up. And so they was out of that. And this area was virtually unprotected. The Union Army was just coming through here, sending all those different bunches through here with the people in this Tippah County, this area, had no protection. So he organized what he called, let's see, the name, what he called that. It was the 2nd Mississippi State Cavalry, but it was a paper organization. It wasn't really under the Confederate service. It was a Mississippi State service. And he set up his headquarters and base in North Tippah Bottom out here toward Antioch. And it was in a impenetrable place where nobody couldn't find it. One thing, we have to safe out there when he come back from a raid or whatever he done, and keep from getting in calls or anything like that. So what he would do when these bunches would come in here and steal and pillage and stuff, he'd get on the back flank of them and stuff and capture some of them. What he started doing that way, he got some suits, Yankee suits. He'd get in the middle of them and confuse them, catch them that way, take prisoners. Several got killed from them, starved, different ones. Then he began to want to operate a little bit more. So he got to noticing all those trains, supply trains, going up and down the Mississippi Central Railroad up here about Grand Junction. And they had a scout check them trains, and he decided one night they'd pull them tracks up about 3.5 miles north of Grand Junction, if I understand right, in a deep cut up there. Well, they pulled the tracks up there in the night, hid out there in the woods. I understand it was about 80 of them. And they waited, that train, that pay train, it was a Yankee pay train coming, and he wanted them Yankee dollars. And what was on it. So they waited. Well, about daylight, the train started coming. And before the engineer knew what was happening, the locomotive and 5 cars were piled up there. Well, it wasn't a pay train. It was a train, all right, but it was a supply train. Well, the people come out it shooting, and they was too. And I think several people got killed. And I won't go into the details of that because I don't know all of them, but several people was killed, and he took 32 prisoners, and he took all the supplies he could take. Well, about that time, the pay train come around the curve. And the engineer saw the wreck in time and throwed on the brakes, but the paymaster thought they was going to hit it and jumped off. So he took the paymaster prisoner too and mounted him on a mule and rode from Grand Junction. But that paymaster had never been on a mule in his life, the way he talked. And they said that man was so sore till he got out here to Antioch and couldn't sit up and walk for a week. That's true. And I didn't want an old mule. That's a long way from Grand Junction to ride here to Antioch and Tippah Bottom down and ride a mule all right. But they brought him with them. And anyway, still it hurts. The Tennessee Union, the Yankee General, y'all know who I'm talking about. hated Uncle Sol and wanted him dead because of all the trouble he was causing, cutting telegraph wires, giving them all kind of trouble. And so the next day after this incident about that train, he got up a bunch and told them when he come back, he'd have his dead body on a wagon. Well, he come down in here, he couldn't start in no kind of way, he could find that place where they hiding over there. Looked ripped all over. Well, what he did find was Colonel John Miller out here, the old Hardy Strickland place. And Colonel John Miller was a good friend of Uncle Sol's. Governor Pettis sent him up here that week to try to organize some scattered conscripts and things into the regiment. Well, when Colonel Miller, they warned him to try to go out south of town a little bit out here. When he got out to Mr. Hardy Strickland's place, people know it now as the Gillard place, the house is still standing out here, lived in. You can still see that little dim driveway where it still show up. When he turned up that driveway, I don't know if he was walking or on his horse. A Union soldier stepped out on him with a gun, told him he was taken prisoner. Well, he had 2 pistols, and he took both them pistols off of him. And Colonel Miller, in a minute, was able to get a hold of him and overtake him and take one of them pistols back. And when he fired on him with it, the thing snapped. And he killed him, the other one killed him. Bullet hit and killed him because that pistol snapped. And so this enraged Uncle Sol, and he got his group together and got Hurst and them by this time was on their way toward Jonesboro, old Jonesboro, you know, in the north end of Tipp County. He went around a side road and got in front of them. First he got in the rear guard of them and caught 8 prisoners. Then he got in front of them and surprised them up there and caught 12 more. And they was down here to get him. And he brought them prisoners back to Ripley, and they got out them in here. The rest of them did. Got away, the rest. They took a woman down here, took Colonel Miller's body, he was from Pontotoc, and took a trusted servant and took that body back to Pontotoc the next day by herself to his family. Now, that's some of the kind of bad stuff happened during that time around here. And not too long after that, they had a big skirmish at Salem, in which it says that Uncle Sol took 43 prisoners up there with his group. And I don't know who he turned them over to or not, who it was. But he took 43 prisoners to the town of Salem. That's when Salem was burnt up there. You know, they destroyed it. Well, about during this time, was having a lot of trouble through here with the Second Iowa. They was coming all down here, just numerous, every few weeks, all through Tipp County, just going to every farm, even taking the covers off the bed. People's houses wouldn't even leave them a blanket. And I can tell you a little story about something they done. This man sitting right here, Jim Daniel. They went to his granddaddy's house up here and tried to rob him. And his grandpa shot through the side light in the door and killed one of them. And they left for a little bit, but he knew they'd come back, and he took his family and got them in a safe place, and they come back that night, burned his house, everything he had up, and he was coming to Ridley to set up a unit of soldiers, wasn't he, to bring over here. They caught him right down on our farm down there on Yellow Rabbit Creek, a rear guard of them Yankees, and shot him and killed him. And I think his son was with him. And they shot him and killed him, and he died right there at the bridge place, where it's at now, where you can cross Yellow Rabbit down there in the field. And he was took back to his farm and buried, and his face is etched on a tombstone today, facing south. They made sure it wasn't facing north. His face is facing south to this day, isn't it? That's a true story. Well, after Vicksburg was took over, and General Chalmers and all their troops at Panola couldn't offer much help way up here. And Ruggles down there at Columbus finally moved Ruggles to Tupelo. It finally, after Vicksburg surrendered, offered us a little bit of help up here. They started sending a few more Confederate troops up in here to patrol this area. Well, at that time, General Forrest decided to make that conscript drive up into Tennessee to try to get more soldiers to build his command up. It was so low. And it was at this time, Uncle Saul went up into Tennessee, all the way up as far as Hickman, Kentucky. And he says in his notes that he killed the notorious Jim Dixon, the wanted Unionist, captured 40 horses at Dyersburg, Hickman, Kentucky, and Madrid Bend. But then on the way back down, met a Union patrol, and Uncle Saul was captured with 55 men. But they was only able to keep him for 12 hours. Him and the 55 men escaped in 12 hours. And some of his horses had got loose and got down around Reelfoot Lake. He rounded them back up, because General Forrest wanted them 40 horses now. And he didn't want to disappoint him, believe me. General Forrest didn't take disappointment too lightly. And he got them 40 horses rounded back up and started on down with them. And that's when he went down and went with under General Forrest and the Forrest new cavalry department under General Order No. 2. When he made it into those, split it up into 4 cavalry departments, and one was Streets Battalion. And he made it, that's when he was made into the 15th Tennessee Cavalry, which he stayed till his death. And after that, about that time, is when they went up there and participated in all that takeover of Fort Pillow. And he helped with that, all that fighting, and all. Everybody's heard about that massacre up there. I don't know what all to believe and what not to believe happened up there, but it was bad, whatever it was. But he was in that, and he was promoted to major by General Forrest as soon as he joined that 15th Tennessee Cavalry to the rank of major. And shortly after that, he was shot by one of his own men, May 2nd, 1864, at Bolivar. About 2 miles south of Bolivar is as close as I can pinpoint it. And I have tried with help. Mr. Rex Brotherton here helped me a great deal with a lot of information and look at where that grave is up there, if he's buried where he was killed. And we have looked for it, but I'm sure after this many years it'd be very hard to ever locate. But he was killed over a dispute about some confiscated cotton. And the story's been told 2 or 3 different ways. I don't know which one's right. But anyway, it was over some, they said for all the cotton to be confiscated and turned into headquarters, keep it falling into federal hands. So I don't know which one, if it was confiscated, some say it was burned. But anyway, General Forrest put the man, was infuriated. They said, cursed the state of Tennessee all night, cursed Bolivar all night, walked back and forth, and said to have the man shot at daylight. And had him 12 men set up with him with a rope around his neck and a gun on him all night. Well, before daylight, one of them let him escape. You can imagine what General Forrest said then. I'd have hated to have been there. But anyway, in 1924, these 2 men, the one that let him escape and the one that done it, met again at a Confederate reunion in Memphis, Tennessee. And I've got a copy of the paper that Mr. Brotherton sent me that explains that whole story, and it is very interesting, believe me. story about that they both were still living and remembered all that. But I would have hated to face General Forrest if I would have been on that guard that next day. And Andrew Brown said, there's no way to cover all these escapades of what Uncle Saul Street did during this time as his band of guerrillas. A lot of them were calling Captain Street, Colonel Street, Major Street in their reports after all these things. Andrew Brown, of course, we know how respected and he was, and his everything that he said, you could bet money on it. It was right. What he put in these books he wrote. He said would be unbelievable if not so well documented. You know, some of the stuff he done. And these Yankees wanted him dead bad. But he didn't die by no Yankee bullet. He died by Confederate. Now, I thought that's pretty ironic, too. And Granddaddy James Joseph Street had 3 brothers killed, and his wife, Holly Morgan Street, had 2 brothers killed in the war. So very few families didn't have a lot killed. I think Grandpa James Joseph walked home from North Carolina with his brother-in-law and 8 children. And when they got to the Linebarger branch over here, both of his wives seen them coming. And they run down to meet them. And they stopped them when they got to that branch and told them, "Don't come no further, we want a bath." Now, this is a story. Now, I got this story from Mavis, and I'm sure it's absolutely correct. And they went to the house and got the wash pot and brought it down there. And boiled them some water. And they took their clothes off and burned them. And took them a good hot soapy bath and put on some clothes and come on to the house. You can imagine after walking that far what kind of shape them clothes was in. They said no, they wouldn't come to the house because they wanted them a good hot soapy bath. And both of them had bad trouble with their legs and feet the rest of their life because of all the walking that far, you know, along there. But I just think that's a ironic story for Solomon Street to have done all of that without getting killed or captured as close as he came all those times. But he done it. But he lost his life in the end. And I appreciate it. I sure do.
Thank you.